I always thought family meant loyalty. Growing up, I believed my parents and my older brother would always have my back, no matter what. We weren't rich, but my father, a small town contractor in Oregon, built our lives with his own two hands. When I was a kid, I watched him pour his sweat and heart into every wooden frame, every concrete pour, every late night blueprint. He used to tell me, Ethan, a man's word and his work are the only things that matter. I believed that, until the day I learned my family had built their world on lies. When my father passed away unexpectedly 3 years ago, everything changed overnight. The man who had kept us together was gone, and my mother, Diana, suddenly became different, cold, calculating, and oddly protective of my brother, Travis. She told me to take time to grieve, to not worry about the family business. Travis will handle the paperwork for now, she'd said softly. I trusted her. I trusted them. Months passed, and I noticed Travis driving a new truck. Then my parents' modest home got renovations worth tens of thousands. When I asked, he said, "Dad had savings you didn't know about." I didn't question it. Grief makes you blind. But a year later, I received a letter from the county clerk's office addressed to my late father, reminding him of an overdue business tax. That's when I saw it. The company wasn't in my father's name anymore. It was in Travis's. Transferred 2 weeks after the funeral. My blood ran cold. I drove straight to my mom's house, the home that had once smelled like fresh coffee and sawdust, now filled with silence. I held up the papers and asked, "When were you going to tell me?" She didn't even flinch. "Ethan," she said, her tone calm, rehearsed, "your father wanted Travis to have the company. You were never interested in business." I laughed, but it wasn't from humor. It was disbelief. I'd been my dad's right-hand man for years. I helped him win contracts, stayed up late with him drawing up plans. I knew every inch of that company. But she just stared at me like I was the intruder in my own home. Something inside me cracked that day. I realized they hadn't just taken my father's legacy, they'd erased me from it entirely. I walked out of that house vowing one thing: I wouldn't let them win. I would find out how deep the betrayal went, and when I did, I'd make them regret every signature, every lie, every stolen brick of the empire my father built. But I had no idea that the truth was darker and far more personal than I could have ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the old photo of Dad and me from when I was 16, both of us covered in sawdust, grinning over a half-built cabin we'd worked on together. That man had trusted his family more than anything. The thought that someone, his own son, could twist that trust made my stomach turn. I poured myself a coffee at 3 a.m., opened my laptop, and started digging. I pulled every public record I could find on my father's company, Mason & Sons Construction. What I found wasn't just suspicious, it was infuriating. My father's signature on the transfer papers looked wrong. Too perfect, too clean. I remembered his hands, rough, calloused, scarred from years of carpentry. His handwriting always shook slightly. This signature looked like it had been lifted from an old document and copied. By dawn, I was sitting in front of an old friend, Kelly Morgan, a local lawyer who had done small contract work for my dad before. I showed her the papers. She frowned immediately. "That's a forgery, Ethan," she said without hesitation. "Your dad couldn't have signed this. Look at the date. It's after his official time of death." My chest tightened. "So what happens now?" I asked. She sighed. "If it's forged, we can challenge it. But you'll need proof, solid proof. And that means going after your own family. Are you ready for that? Ready?" I didn't know, but I knew I had no choice. "I have to do it," I said. "Dad built that company for both of us. Travis stole it for himself." Kelly leaned back, thinking. "Then start close. If this was an inside job, your mother must have been involved. Nobody can push a transfer like that through alone." The words cut deeper than I expected. My mother, the woman who'd kissed my forehead before every school exam, who'd cried at my graduation, she'd done this? But the more I thought about her calm, empty expression when I'd confronted her, the more it made sense. That night, I drove to the construction office. The front door still had the old Mason logo my dad had carved himself. Inside, Travis had remodeled everything. Modern glass desks, imported coffee machine, framed certificates, his name on every single one. I walked into Dad's old office. The scent of cedar still lingered, faint but familiar. But his old filing cabinet was gone, replaced with a sleek black safe under the desk. I crouched down, ran my fingers along the edge, and smiled. My father had once shown me a small hidden catch under the drawer, a backup key slot. I found the key in the garage behind a loose brick, exactly where he'd kept it. When I turned it in the slot, the safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of paperwork, old contracts, and one sealed envelope with my name scrawled in my father's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I tore it open. Inside was a single line written in blue ink. Ethan, if you're reading this, then you already know who betrayed me. The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my throat, because under that note was a photocopy of a check signed by my mother, transferring $150,000 to someone named Gregory Vance. And in the memo line, my blood ran cold when I read, "For document signing and verification, Mason & Sons transfer." I stared at that check until the words blurred. My mother's signature, perfect, precise, undeniable, mocked me from the page. The date was 2 days after my father's funeral. She hadn't even waited until he was in the ground before she started paying people off. My hands trembled as I took photos of everything: the check, the letter, the envelope. My dad had known something was wrong before he died. That meant whatever happened to him might not have been natural at all. I stepped out of the office into the night air, my chest tightening. The silence around the construction yard felt heavier now, almost suffocating. The flickering security light above me buzzed weakly, casting long shadows across the half-finished wooden frame of a new house. I could almost hear my dad's voice echoing in my mind. "Be careful who you trust, son." The next morning, I drove to Kelly's office with the documents. Her eyes widened when she saw the check. "Gregory Vance," she muttered. "That name rings a bell." She typed quickly, pulling up local records. A minute later, she looked up at me grimly. "He's not just anyone, Ethan. He's a notary public, licensed in this county for 20 years. If your mother paid him, it was to certify your father's fake signature." I felt like someone had punched me. "So he's the one who made it official?" She nodded. "Yes, and if he's still around, he might be your key witness, or your biggest problem." That night, I parked outside Gregory Vance's house, a modest brick place near the river, the kind where people live quiet, unassuming lives. I watched from my car as the porch light flicked on, and a man in his late 50s stepped out carrying a trash bag. His movements were slow, careful, like someone with something heavy on his conscience. I got out, approached him. "Mr. Vance?" I asked. He turned, startled. I introduced myself, explained who I was. At first, his face went pale, then he shook his head rapidly. "I can't talk about that," he said, voice shaky. "Please, just go." But I didn't move. I held up the photo of the check. "You took this money. I just want the truth." His eyes darted to the house, then back to me. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Your brother, he said your father wanted this, that it was a business transfer. I didn't question it. But when I realized your dad was already gone," he stopped, swallowing hard. "I told them I wouldn't do any more work like that. Then they threatened me, said they'd ruin me if I talked." My pulse thundered. "They forged my father's signature, didn't they?" He hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes. Your brother brought me a copy of your father's license, and your mother said she'd handle the rest. I notarized it because I was scared of them, but I kept the original draft, the one with the signature before it was altered." My heart nearly stopped. "You still have it?" He looked me dead in the eyes. "Yes, and if they find out I told you, they'll come after me next." Before I could ask anything else, headlights swept across the street. A black SUV slowed in front of his house. Vance's face went white. He grabbed my arm, his voice trembling. "Go, Ethan. Go now. They're watching." The SUV rolled to a stop. Two silhouettes sat inside, their faces obscured by the glare of the headlights. My instincts screamed to run, but then the passenger window rolled down and a voice I hadn't heard in months cut through the night. "Ethan," Travis called coldly. "We need to talk." I froze. My brother's voice was like a dagger, clean and sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. I turned to look at him, standing there behind the wheel, his face expressionless in the dim glow of the headlights. His eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses, even though it was nearly midnight. He didn't look like the brother I once knew. He looked like a stranger. I took a step back, my heart racing, but Vance's hand grabbed my arm, pulling me closer to the shadows of his porch. "Go," he hissed, his grip tightening. "You're not ready for this." I could feel the weight of the decision crushing me. My mind screamed at me to leave, to escape before Travis could get any closer, but my feet wouldn't move. Everything I'd uncovered, the betrayal, the lies, my mother's complicity, was all spiraling around me, tightening like a noose. I couldn't walk away now, not when I was so close to the truth. I turned back to Vance, giving him a pleading look. He didn't need to say another word. He stepped back into his house, leaving the door slightly ajar. I didn't follow him inside. Instead, I stood tall and walked directly toward the SUV. Travis didn't flinch as I approached. The dark windows gleamed in the moonlight, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and calculating. "I was wondering when you'd show up, little brother," he said in that low, mocking tone that had always grated on my nerves. "We need to talk about the company." I stood in front of the SUV, not moving, feeling the cool breeze whip around me. I wasn't sure if I was shaking from the cold or from the flood of adrenaline coursing through my veins, my fists clenched by my sides. "You really think we can talk?" I asked, my voice steady, but my insides were a mess. "You've been lying to me for a year. This isn't some family disagreement anymore. This is fraud." He laughed, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Fraud?" He leaned back in his seat, smirking. "Come on, Ethan. I've been handling things. Dad was getting old. The company needed a new direction, a new focus. You weren't cut out for it." The words stung more than I expected, but I didn't let it show. "You forged Dad's signature. You lied to the whole family. You took everything that was supposed to be mine." He didn't even blink. "You were always the dreamer, Ethan, the one who thought things would just fall into place. You've never been able to see the bigger picture. You're not built for business, and you never will be." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folder. "This is bigger than you think. It was always bigger than you think." He tossed the folder on the dashboard between us. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. Without thinking, I opened it. Inside were more papers, contracts, agreements, and something that made my blood run cold. A list of properties, investments, and bank transfers, all signed by my mother. But there was one name on the list that I hadn't seen in months. Gregory Vance. "I know what you're trying to do," I said, my voice a little louder now, the anger beginning to boil over. "I'm not playing your game. I'll take this to court. I'll take this all the way." Travis just looked at me, his expression unmoving. "You really think anyone's going to listen to you, Ethan? Mom's got everything covered. She's protected this family." He leaned forward in the seat, his voice dropping low. "And don't think for a second that I haven't covered my tracks." I leaned in closer to the SUV window. "What are you talking about?" He smirked. "You think you're the first one to get suspicious? You've been sniffing around, asking questions. But there's one thing you don't know, Ethan. You've already lost. This has been set in motion for years. Mom, Vance, all of us. We've been building this. Ness, the company was never going to be yours." My stomach dropped. I felt like the ground was slipping beneath me, but I refused to let him see it. "You didn't just steal the company," I whispered. "Did you?" He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "No. We've been laundering money through those properties. You were too blind to see it, too busy with your little ideas of legacy. But now..." He trailed off, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Now we have everything, and you're just in the way." I felt a surge of rage flood through me, but I stayed calm. "You're making a huge mistake, Travis." He laughed again, the sound full of cruel amusement. "No. The mistake was thinking you could stand up to me. The company? That's just the beginning. You want to fight me? Fine, but know this." He leaned close, his face only inches from mine. "You'll lose, and I'll make sure of it." The door slammed shut before I could respond. The SUV roared to life and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. I stood there, shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. The world around me seemed to spin for a moment. Everything was crashing down. My family, the company, the life I thought I knew. It was all a lie. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let Travis get away with this. I wasn't going to let him win. I'd spent my whole life being pushed aside, being told I wasn't good enough. But now I was going to fight for what was mine. For the company, for my father's legacy, and for myself. I just needed one thing, the truth. And I was going to get it, no matter what it took. I drove straight to Kelly's office, hands still trembling from the confrontation. I slammed the folder on her desk and let the words tumble out. Vance, forgery, the check. Travis's SUV, the threats. Kelly listened without interrupting, her face hardening with every detail. When I finished, She sat back and stared at me for a long second. "You did the right thing coming here," she said finally. "You've got a mountain of motive and a sliver of proof. We can build this, but we have to be surgical. If they're laundering money and silencing witnesses, they'll move fast." I swallowed. "What do we do first?" She tapped her pen twice, thinking. "We get Vance some protection and we secure those documents. If he's willing to hand over the original notarized draft, we photocopy everything, notarize it ourselves, and file an emergency injunction to freeze the company's assets. Then we go to the DA with what we have. But you need to understand, once we start, they'll retaliate. They'll try to discredit you. They'll call you greedy, unstable, a sore loser. They'll bring up family drama, and in a small town, that narrative spreads fast." I felt a bitter laugh rise up in me. "They already spread things. They called me the dreamer, the one who wouldn't handle business. They lied about Dad. And they'll lie harder now," Kelly warned. "So we prepare. We lock down communication, document everything, and we don't go anywhere alone." That evening, I met Gregory Vance at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where people didn't notice if you sat in a corner and watched the rain. He shuffled in like a man who'd been losing sleep for years. Hair thinner, shoulders stooped. He slid into the booth opposite me with a look that said he expected danger to follow him even here. "I got you in touch with Kelly," I said, and watched his face relax a degree. He handed me a thin envelope. Inside was the original notarized draft, paper that smelled faintly of cigarettes and cheap ink. The signature on that page matched my father's true hand perfectly, shaky, a little faded, the tiny loop on the Y that only Dad made when he hurried. "How long have you had this?" I asked. "Since the day I realized I'd been duped," he said. "I kept it locked away. I thought I could fix it quietly, pay back what I took, and nobody would get hurt. But your brother didn't want any loose ends." His hands shook as he pushed his coffee away. "They came to me twice after your father died. They offered more money. They threatened me. I was scared, Ethan. I'm scared now." "You should be," I said softly, "because if you didn't notarize those papers honestly, that's a crime. And if you were threatened, that's extortion." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'll testify. I'll sign an affidavit. But I need something in writing from you. Protection, if they find out I talked to you tonight." He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. I left the diner feeling hollow and furious and more determined than ever. That night, I slept in my truck in the company lot, the place lit by a single failing lamp, because the last thing I wanted was to walk into my mother and brother's comfortable kitchen where smiles would hide knives. I went through the notary draft until my eyes blurred, matching dates, stamps, and the tiny code Vance's office used on official forms. It all pointed to deliberate falsification, but it also pointed to something darker. A clause buried in one of the transferred contracts that handed control of a slew of properties to a shell company registered in a neighboring county, a shell company with ties to a bank account listed under an alias my father would never have used. I felt nauseous. This wasn't just theft. This was an operation, and my family sat at the center. The next morning, Kelly filed the injunction. Papers were served. The bank accounts linked to the shell company were frozen. I watched as the locks metaphorically snapped shut on the empire Travis and Mom had been building. For the first time since my father's funeral, a small measure of justice shimmered on the horizon, but the victory was thin and dangerous. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a picture message, a screenshot of my father's old workshop, a private place where I used to go to think. Someone had been there that morning. The photo showed the workbench strewn with tools, and in the corner on the floor, a small vial of a white powder I couldn't identify. The caption read, "We can still make things worse." My blood ran cold. I called Kelly immediately. She answered after 2 rings, her voice clipped. "Pack a bag. Don't go home tonight. Come to the firm. And for God's sake, don't trust anyone who used to be close to you." I felt like I was suffocating. My mother had sent the check, my brother had told me I'd lose, and now my father's workshop, my refuge, had been violated. I realized then that whatever my family had done, they were willing to go to terrifying lengths to keep it hidden. That night at the firm, surrounded by boxes of evidence and legal pads, I replayed every memory of Dad through new eyes. Little things that once seemed like quirks, how he always kept a glass jar of powdered medicine in the top shelf, how he'd cough sometimes and write it off, suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. I pulled up Dad's medical records with Kelly's help, looking for anything out of place. At first, there was nothing. Routine checkups, a clean bill of health several months before he died. But then I found the last hospital visit notes, a terse line that made my throat close. Unclear etiology, awaiting toxicology. My breath hitched. Toxicology. My father's death certificate said natural causes. But the hospital notes suggested someone had suspected otherwise. Someone had started tests and then the results were missing. Files altered, records amended. Whoever had access to those records had made it look like nothing suspicious remained. I felt the world tilt again, but this time I didn't back down. If someone had tampered with my father's medical files, if there had been a toxicology report that vanished, then the stakes were no longer just money and legacy. They were life and death. Kelly looked at me across the conference table, her face set. We're going to subpoena every hospital record, every lab, every technician involved. I want the chain of custody for any blood samples from the last visit. If those were altered, we'll find out who touched them. And if they destroyed evidence, I asked, voice small, then we find the people who knew, the people who had motive. You know more about them than anyone. That makes you dangerous to them and valuable to us. That night, I sat alone in my truck again, the city lights washing the dashboard in pale blues. I thought of my father's hands, calloused, warm, always steady, and of my mother's cool smile when I'd first confronted her. Betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth, but beneath that metallic bite, under the fear and the hurt, something else pulsed. A fierce, unrelenting resolve. They had stolen everything, but I was still breathing. I still had my father's handwriting in my pocket, Vance's trembling testimony, and a lawyer who wouldn't let them bury the truth. I had no idea how far I'd have to go or what I'd have to give up. All I knew was that I would not back down. Not now. Not ever. Kelly served the subpoenas with the quiet efficiency of someone who has spent her life inside courtrooms. She moved like a chess master. Requests for medical records, chains of custody, employee rosters from the hospital's lab, even internal emails from administrators. Each paper she filed felt like a small victory. But with every step forward, the air grew colder. The people we were poking at didn't like being exposed. Within 48 hours, the DA's office called. They wanted to meet. I sat in Kelly's cramped conference room while a young assistant prosecutor, sharp suit, sharper eyes, laid out the plan. We can subpoena the text, but if you're right and someone altered records, we'll need testimony showing motive and access. That's where your family comes in. He didn't have to finish the sentence for me to understand. They wanted me to testify against my mother and brother. My phone buzzed almost the moment I left the DA's office. Unknown number. I answered before I thought about it. A woman's voice, low and steady, said, "Mr. Mason, I know who you are. I worked in the hospital records department before I was let go last year. If you want the truth about those toxicology results, meet me at the river dock at midnight. Don't bring anyone." Then the line clicked dead. I wanted to tell Kelly. I wanted to bring the DA. I wanted to wall my emotions off and do everything by the book. Instead, I felt the old instincts, my father's instincts, push me into action. I went alone. Fear felt like an animal under my skin, but it was no match for the rage that had been building for months. At the dock, a woman waited, wrapped in a thrift store coat, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She introduced herself as Marta. Her hands shook when she handed me a stack of printouts, internal hospital emails, a scanned lab log, a timetable showing that the toxicology sample had been logged and then, oddly, marked disposed the very next day. Her handwriting annotations were frantic, underlined passages and circled timestamps. "They told me to shred paperwork I didn't understand," she said. "When I asked questions, they said it was under legal review. Then I overheard them mention a clean file and saw a phone. Someone's telling them what to say." Her voice dropped. I lost my job for asking too many questions. The printouts Marta gave me were the first time I felt that we weren't chasing ghosts. There was a window of opportunity, about 72 hours after my father's last hospital visit, when someone had access to his samples and to the digital records. Whoever had access during that window had the ability to alter results. Whoever had the means to do that had to be someone with inside connections, that someone my mother or Travis could reach. I almost didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drove to my father's grave and sat on the cold bench until dawn, clutching the paper in my hands. The sky lightened, casting long shadows across the stones. I told my father out loud what I'd learned, as if speaking would make it real. "They tampered with you," I said to the wind. "You didn't die of natural causes, did you?" I had no answer, only a mounting list of questions and a growing certainty that my family had orchestrated not just theft, but something far more sinister. By morning, Kelly had arranged for Marta to come forward with a sworn statement and for the DA to request the hospital's raw server logs. The legal machine moved slow, but it moved. That afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was oddly calm, syrupy, with false concern. "Ethan, dear, everyone is so worried about you. Why don't you come home? We can talk this through like a family." I wanted to tell her where to go. Instead, I asked one simple question. "Where were you the night before Dad died?" There was a short silence. Then she said, "I was at home resting." "Why?" Her answer was too clean, too practiced. It landed like a slap. I didn't answer. I hung up and texted Marta to tell her not to meet anyone else alone. Minutes later, my truck alarm screamed. Someone had tried the door hard and then driven off. A note was tucked under the wiper blade in thick black marker. "Stop digging." It was the first time the stakes felt truly personal. It wasn't just about courtrooms or documents anymore. They wanted me scared, silent, gone. I slid the note into my pocket and felt the familiar tightening in my chest that comes before the fight. Whatever they wanted, I decided then I would not give it to them. Not my silence, not my surrender. That night, as rain pelted the windows of Kelly's office, she looked at me with an intensity that steadied me. "They'll escalate," she said plainly. "Make no mistake. But we have enough that if Marta's statement checks out and the server logs show tampering, we'll have a strong case. You're not just fighting for the company anymore, Ethan. You're fighting for your father." I stared out the window, watching the water turn the parking lot into a dark mirror. A plan began to form in my mind, one that would force the truth into daylight, even if it meant burning bridges I'd once thought unbreakable. I didn't know how many pieces I'd lose in the fire. I only knew I was ready to strike the match. The next morning, Kelly woke me up in her office with a tap on the shoulder and a steaming cup of coffee. "We got something," she said, her voice tight. "The DA's tech team pulled partial server logs from the hospital backup. There are timestamp discrepancies. Someone logged into the system using an admin override at 3:14 a.m. on the night your father's toxicology sample was marked disposed. Guess who the override is registered to?" I rubbed my eyes. "Who?" She slid a printed page across the desk. "Dr. Meredith Clay, the hospital's senior pathologist, retired 6 months ago, lives out in Maple Ridge near the old quarry." I stared at the name. Meredith Clay. I remembered her vaguely, a stoic woman with silver hair and an icy composure who'd attended Dad's funeral, briefly hugging my mother before leaving early. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now it felt like a buried thread yanked loose. Kelly's gaze sharpened. "We're going to pay her a visit. But I need you calm. No accusations, no threats, just listen." When we arrived, Dr. Clay's house stood isolated at the edge of the woods, the morning fog wrapping the porch like a secret. She answered the door after a long pause, eyes narrowing as she recognized my last name. "Mason," she said, not a question. "You shouldn't be here." "We just want to talk," Kelly said, showing her credentials. "We know about the login. We know about the sample. Doctors." Clay hesitated, then opened the door wider. Inside, the house smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Every surface was meticulously clean, every photo frame perfectly aligned. She motioned for us to sit. "If you're here about what I think you are," she said slowly, "you're too late. I told them I wanted nothing more to do with it." I leaned forward. "With what?" She studied me for a long moment before sighing. "Your father's death wasn't natural. He'd been dosed with a compound, mild at first but cumulative. It mimics cardiac arrest in the final stages. I ran the initial tests myself, but before I could issue the report, the results were taken from me. Your mother came to see me 2 days later with hospital administrators. They said there had been a clerical error and that a revised report would be issued. I was told to retire early and forget what I saw." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Did you keep copies?" Her gaze flicked toward a locked filing cabinet in the corner. "One. But if I hand it over, you'll bring danger back to my door." Kelly's tone softened. Dr. Clay, if this document still exists, it's the missing piece that could expose everything. Your silence keeps them untouchable. For a long moment, Dr. Clay said nothing. Then she rose, unlocked the cabinet, and pulled out a sealed envelope marked Confidential, Mason Case. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. I kept this because I couldn't stomach what they did, but once you open it, there's no going back. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside were lab results, test strips, and a summary signed by Dr. Clay herself. My father's blood work contained traces of a toxin, one found in a discontinued heart medication that hadn't been prescribed to him in over a year. Intentional dosing, prolonged exposure. Cause of death, acute cardiac failure secondary to poisoning. The words swam on the page. I looked up at her, my voice raw. "Why didn't you say anything? I tried," she whispered. "But your mother had powerful friends at the board. She made sure anyone who spoke up disappeared quietly. I thought I'd be next." Kelly slipped the envelope into her briefcase. "You've done the right thing," she said. "We'll get you protection." As we left the house, the reality of it hit me like a hammer. My father hadn't died in his sleep. He'd been murdered. And my mother had covered it up. On the drive back, I barely spoke. The world outside the window blurred into gray. My childhood replayed in flashes. Family dinners, Dad's laugh, Mom's cool glance when he coughed. Every memory twisted into something rotten. Kelly's voice cut through the silence. "Ethan, I need you to prepare for what's coming. This goes beyond civil court. Once we hand this to the DA, it becomes a homicide investigation." I nodded, staring straight ahead. "Good," I said. "Let them come. I've been waiting for the truth to hurt." That night, I returned to my apartment and found the door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. Inside, drawers were open, papers scattered, the couch cushions slashed. On the kitchen counter lay a single item, a photo of me and my father fishing when I was 10. The glass cracked clean through the middle. On the back, in red ink, someone had written 3 words: "Stop or drown." For the first time, I understood just how deep this betrayal went and how far my family was willing to go to keep their secrets buried. But instead of fear, something else filled me: resolve. They wanted me to stop digging, so I decided to dig until there was nothing left to hide. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The words "stop or drown" kept replaying in my head, louder each time, like a warning drum echoing in the dark. I sat on the floor of my wrecked apartment, surrounded by broken glass and scattered papers, and realized something chilling. Someone had been inside for more than just intimidation. They'd searched the place. For what I didn't know, but it meant they were watching, keeping tabs, waiting for me to make the wrong move. By sunrise, Kelly had me relocated to a secure rental downtown. The blinds stayed shut, and she made sure there were security cameras installed before we even unpacked. "This isn't paranoia," she said firmly. "It's survival. They're getting desperate." Desperate was an understatement. The DA's office had already received anonymous calls claiming I'd forged the new evidence myself, that I was mentally unstable, even that I'd threatened my mother. Lies, every one of them. But it showed how quickly my family was fighting back. They were spreading poison faster than I could fight it. Later that afternoon, I drove out to my father's old company lot. It was empty now, operations frozen under the injunction, but I needed to see it, to feel something familiar. The air smelled like sawdust and oil, the way it always had when Dad was alive. I walked into his old office, untouched since the day he'd passed. His mug still sat on the desk, a half-faded "Number 1 Dad" scrawled across the side. Then I noticed something odd. The baseboard under his bookshelf had a new screw, one that didn't match the others. I grabbed a screwdriver from his old toolbox and pried it loose. Behind it, tucked inside a narrow cavity in the wall, was a manila envelope, brittle with age. My breath caught as I slid it out. Inside were printed bank statements and handwritten notes in my father's handwriting. At the top of the first page, "If something happens to me, trust no one but Ethan." I sat back hard, my chest tightening. He had known. The notes outlined what he'd discovered months before his death. Money transfers from the company into offshore accounts, all linked to shell corporations registered under fake names. And one line stood out more than any other: "Suspect internal involvement. Confirmed signatures falsified. Board complicit. Don't let them bury this." My hands shook as I read. Every suspicion, every instinct I'd buried under guilt and grief. It was all true. My father hadn't just been a victim, he'd been hunted for uncovering their crimes. I took the envelope straight to Kelly. She spread the papers across her desk, her expression unreadable at first. "Ethan," she said after a long pause, this changes everything. These aren't just corporate theft records. These are criminal conspiracy documents, money laundering, fraud, falsification of federal tax records. Combined with Dr. Clay's evidence, this is enough to launch a federal case." I leaned forward. "Then let's do it." She looked at me carefully. "It won't be clean. Once this goes to the feds, you'll lose any chance at reconciling with your family. Your mother could face prison, so could your brother." I stared at the papers, at my father's uneven handwriting, and felt something twist in my chest. Not grief this time, but clarity. "I buried my father thinking he died peacefully," I said, "but he was murdered. If I stay quiet now, I'm helping them finish what they started." Kelly nodded. "Then we go all in." We spent the next 12 hours scanning, notarizing, and securing every piece of evidence. Kelly's assistant locked copies in 3 different safety deposit boxes under aliases. By midnight, the package was ready for federal submission. That's when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. My mother's voice came through, icy and trembling. "Ethan, please, stop this. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly," I said quietly. "You and Travis stole from Dad, you covered up his death, and now you're scared." "You think I wanted this?" she snapped. "You think I had a choice? He was going to destroy everything, your future, the company, all of us. You're too naive to see that sometimes sacrifices have to be made." My blood went cold. "Sacrifices? You poisoned your husband." There was a long silence on the line, followed by a single shaking breath. "You'll ruin us all," she whispered. "You'll regret this." Then the line went dead. Kelly looked at me across the room. "That sounded a lot like a confession." "Yeah," I said, setting the phone down, "but I want it on record." She pulled out a recorder, her tone all business now. "Then we make sure this call gets transcribed. Every word she just said will hang her in court." For the first time in months, I felt something close to calm. Not peace. Peace was gone, but purpose. I wasn't the scared son anymore, chasing shadows. I was the last Mason standing on the truth, holding a torch my father had left burning in secret. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, the storm pounding against the glass. Kelly closed the file, sealing the final copy of evidence inside a thick folder marked "Federal Submission, Urgent." I exhaled slowly. "Once this goes out," I said, "there's no going back." Kelly met my eyes. "Then let's make sure it lands where it needs to." And just like that, the moment felt like a countdown. The morning the storm broke, the sky looked bruised, swollen with rain. I was standing by the window of the rented apartment when the first flash of blue lights reflected off the wet glass. Unmarked cars lined the street below, FBI, state police, and local law enforcement working in quiet sync. Kelly's message came through seconds later. "It's happening. Stay inside." I didn't move, didn't breathe as I watched agents fan out. 2 cars turned toward my mother's house, another toward the company offices. For months I'd dreamt of this moment, justice in motion. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like an autopsy, like watching the heart of my family being carved open for everyone to see. By noon, the news hit every local outlet. Mason family investigation, allegations of fraud, forgery, and foul play. Cameras parked outside the gates of my mother's estate, reporters shouting her name as the agents led her into the car, wrists bound, expression blank. I wanted to hate her, to feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt hollow. Kelly called an hour later. "They've taken your mother into custody. Travis is missing. We've got warrants for his arrest, but his phone's off and his car was found abandoned near the river." The river. My blood ran cold. The same one from the note. Stop or drown. I grabbed my keys and was halfway out the door when Kelly's voice stopped me. "Ethan, don't be an idiot. If he's desperate, he's dangerous." Which is exactly why I have to find him before someone else does. I hung up and drove. The roads shimmered with rain, the wipers thudding a frantic rhythm. The closer I got to the river, the more my stomach twisted. I found Travis's car parked under the old bridge. Door open, keys still in the ignition. I called his name, my voice echoing over the rushing water. Then I heard it, a sound like someone sobbing, muffled and close. I turned and saw him sitting on the embankment, drenched, his hands clutching something small and metallic. Travis, I said carefully, stepping closer. Put it down. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot and wild. You ruined us, Ethan. You think you're the hero? You've destroyed everything Dad built. Dad built something honest, I said. You and Mom turned it into rot. He laughed, a dry, broken sound. You think you know the truth? You don't know anything. She wasn't the one who started it. I was. I took the first payment. I forged the papers. She only covered it up to protect me. The confession hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. You killed him? His jaw tightened. I didn't mean to. He found out about the shell companies, said he'd go to the board. I just wanted to scare him, slow him down. The drug was supposed to weaken him, not, his voice cracked, not kill him. The gun in his hand trembled. I took another step forward, my palms raised. Then stop running, Travis. Turn yourself in. It's over. No, he whispered. It's only over for me. Before I could move, he turned the gun, not toward me, but toward the water. The sound that followed was swallowed by the storm. I lunged too late, my hands gripping empty air as his body hit the current and vanished beneath the churning surface. By the time the police arrived, there was nothing left but the rippling water and the echo of everything we'd both lost. I gave my statement numbly, unable to process the words coming out of my own mouth. Kelly showed up an hour later, rain plastering her hair to her face. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't need to. That night, I sat alone in the apartment, staring at my father's handwriting one last time. Trust no one but Ethan. He must have known I'd end up here, alone, but standing in the truth. The papers we'd submitted had already triggered a full federal investigation. My mother's charges would include conspiracy, obstruction, and accessory to manslaughter. My brother's confession, caught on my phone's recorder without either of us realizing it, sealed their fate. And yet, there was no victory in it. Just silence. The kind that comes after thunder. A week later, I attended my father's grave again. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint hum of the river in the distance. I knelt, placing a folded photo on the headstone, the one of me and him fishing, the glass now replaced. I did it, Dad, I said quietly. They can't hurt anyone anymore. For the first time in months, I felt him there, not in the pain or the anger, but in the peace that followed the truth. My family's legacy was gone, burned to ash, but in its place, something new was growing. Freedom. And as I stood to leave, I realized something else. Sometimes the only way to honor the past is to burn down the lies it was built on, even if the fire takes everything with it. 6 months passed before I could look in a mirror without flinching. The storm that tore my family apart had finally calmed, leaving behind the eerie quiet of aftermath. Court hearings, endless paperwork, media stories that twisted facts into fables. The Masons' fall from grace became a headline, then a documentary pitch, then a ghost of a story people whispered about at bars. For everyone else, it was scandal. For me, it was a scar. I sold what was left of my family's house, not for profit, for closure. Watching the old oak doors close behind me one final time, I didn't feel grief, just relief. Every room had become a mausoleum of manipulation. Mom's study where she dictated press statements, Dad's office still holding the faint smell of his aftershave. I donated most of his belongings to charity, keeping only one thing, his old fountain pen, the one he used to sign every deal, every letter, every note that began with son. Kelly called occasionally, checking in. You holding up? She'd ask, always blunt but soft underneath. She said the DA was pushing for a long sentence for my mother. Conspiracy, obstruction, fraud, and tampering with medical evidence. The board had officially dissolved the Mason Foundation, freezing the assets. The legacy that had once defined our family name was now a cautionary tale. But justice doesn't heal, not really. It just stops the bleeding. Healing, I learned, is quieter. It's waking up and realizing the world doesn't end because you don't belong to a family anymore. It's having coffee with Cassie, the journalist who broke the full story, and realizing you can talk about it without trembling. It's writing a letter you'll never send to your mother, not with rage, but with release. I moved to Seattle, started consulting for a nonprofit that investigates corporate ethics violations. The irony wasn't lost on me. The son of a corrupt dynasty trying to rebuild a sense of morality from the wreckage. But maybe that's what redemption looks like, building something honest on top of ashes. One evening, after a long day reviewing case files, I came home to find a letter slipped under my door. No return address, just my name written in a shaky hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was from my mother. The letter had been forwarded from the prison, dated weeks earlier. Ethan, you were right. About all of it. I thought I was protecting what your father built, but in the end I was protecting my own fear. You got his strength. I only carried his shadow. I know forgiveness isn't something I can ask for, but I hope one day you find peace. Not for me, but for you, Mom. For a long time, I just stared at it. My first instinct was to tear it up. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it beside Dad's pen in my desk drawer. Not forgiveness, but finality. That night, I drove to the river, the same river that had taken Travis. The water was calm now, the air still. I stood at the edge, tossing a smooth stone into the current. The ripples spread, faded, disappeared. And for the first time, I didn't see my family's destruction when I looked at that river. I saw reflection, the quiet proof that survival isn't about what you lose, but what you choose to rebuild. As I turned to leave, the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain and pine. The storm was gone. The story was over. And somehow I was still standing, not as a mason, not as the victim of betrayal, but as the man who walked through the fire and didn't burn.